sweating from a severe fever, likely a malignant strain of malaria, and physically exhausted by years of accumulated battle wounds, the 32-year-old king was dying. In his final hours, he handed his royal signet ring to his cavalry commander. It was June in the year 323 BC. Here, behind the towering walls of Babylon, the commander of the known world was taking his last breaths. He left behind a massive succession crisis. His Bactrian wife, Roxana, was heavily pregnant. The empire had no clear living heir to assume the throne. According to historical accounts, his generals gathered around the bed and asked who should inherit the realm. Alexander gave a simple, highly destructive answer: to the strongest. This map illustrates the terrifying scale of the territory he just surrendered to his ambitious generals. In slightly over a decade, the Macedonian borders had expanded out from Greece, sweeping across the Near East, and reaching all the way to the Indus River. As the map highlights, this territory consisted of deeply divided, historically independent zones. Egypt, Persia, and Bactria shared almost no cultural ties, languages, or governing traditions. Alexander had successfully built a hyper-lethal military machine capable of conquering all of them. He had established zero institutional framework to actually govern them. To understand how a single king held this massive expanse together, we have to look backward. Alexander did not build his own army. His father, King Philip II, spent decades turning the remote backwater kingdom of Macedonia into a highly disciplined military power. This diagram shows Philip's innovation, the Macedonian phalanx. He reorganized a standard Greek infantry block into a much denser formation. Crucially, he armed the front ranks with the sarissa, an 18-foot pike. This created an impenetrable wall of spikes, keeping enemies away while pushing forward. In 336 BC, Philip was suddenly assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. He left his highly trained, finely tuned engine of war sitting idle, waiting for a new driver. Alexander's early victories in Asia relied entirely on his father's engineering. He inherited the most advanced weapon system in the ancient world, completely ready for deployment. Alexander knew exactly how to operate that weapon. This schematic illustrates his adaptation of Philip's infantry block at the Battle of Gaugamela. Confronted by Persian scythed chariots, Alexander ordered his double-edged phalanx to actively open its ranks. The chariots simply passed harmlessly through the gaps, rendering the Persian attack useless. But battlefield tactics alone could not secure an empire. Alexander was heavily driven by a specific ideological worldview, initially shaped by his famous tutor, Aristotle. Aristotle taught that non-Greeks were barbarians, naturally suited for subjugation. Alexander rejected this view completely. Obsessed with the Iliad, he saw himself as a mythic, unifying hero, tasked with bringing the known world together under a single divine banner. Once in Asia, he enforced aggressive cultural assimilation. He married Roxana, the daughter of a Bactrian nobleman. He began wearing Persian royal dress and demanded his subjects perform traditional Persian bowing rituals. These inclusive policies deeply infuriated his veteran Macedonian generals, who viewed the conquered Persians with contempt. For Alexander, integrating the local elites was the only practical way to pacify the massive Asian territories without fighting endless rebellions. He replaced institutional state-building with his own mythology. The cult of his personality, his divine claims, and his physical presence became the only structural linchpin holding the entire map together. Which brings us back to Babylon in 323 BC. The moment Alexander's lungs failed, that linchpin evaporated. The generals, known as the Diadochi, the successors, took his final words as a mandate for absolute war. They immediately turned their massive armies against one another to carve out their own personal kingdoms. This map shows the immediate geopolitical result. Without a designated leader, the unified Macedonian borders fractured into distinct, aggressively hostile territories, plunging the region into decades of conflict. Born into the middle of this chaos was Alexander IV, the posthumous son of Alexander and Roxana. Nominally declared a joint king alongside his uncle, the boy was entirely stripped of agency. He was brought back to Macedonia with his mother, serving strictly as a political pawn to be traded and manipulated by the warring generals. Before reaching adulthood to claim his father's throne, the teenage king was quietly assassinated in the dark halls of Macedonia, effectively eliminating the true bloodline. Today, the archaeological reality of this dynastic collapse sits in the ancient capital of Aigai. In the 1970s, excavators uncovered rich royal tombs at Vergina, including the remains of a young teenage boy buried amid the wealth of a fallen empire. Alexander pushed Hellenistic culture to the edges of the known world, blending East and West under the force of his own will. But by failing to design a government that could outlive him, he guaranteed the total eradication of his own dynasty.